Mark Pollock, thank you so much indeed for joining me today. Always a pleasure to speak to you.
Likewise.
At the beginning of the pandemic, in your words, you said, "We're in the midst of a crisis and must find a way to move forward, despite the excruciatingly slow progress and seemingly unbeatable odds." How's it been for you, and how are you feeling towards it now?
Well, look, I perhaps I'm becoming a specialist in this.
Yes.
Every 10 years, I went blind when I was 22 in 1998. Everything was a blank page. Rebuilt my identity. Then I broke my back when I was 34 back in 2010. I then tested all the stuff that I speak about, all these decision themes that I spoke about. I tested them in the aftermath of paralysis. And then in the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, all of that uncertainty, blank page again. Again, I was testing what I'd been speaking about, what I'd been living, what I'd been researching. So, don't hang around me in another 10 years because there's likely to be a problem.
I'll take that advice. So when the pandemic hit us, kind of from your perspective, did you feel that you were much more kind of the way you thought was different to how the rest of the population were thinking, as in you were already thinking further ahead than the immediate and looking towards recovery? And how have you seen the rest of the human race of population have adapted to your way of thinking?
Yeah, well, I think in a way, my lens on the world has trained me to focus on the decisions that we make rather than the challenges that appear, whether we choose them or they choose us. And clearly, we've all experienced this shared challenge that has chosen us, and we're being prompted to make decisions in an imperfect world. So I run what I call the resilience cycle of facts, anchoring, and hope on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, monthly, annually, and whenever these big challenges appear. So the first thing I do is confront the brutal facts, like Admiral Stockdale did, who I spoke about in my TED talk back in 2018. Confront the brutal facts, the good, the bad, the ugly, just as a stock take of where we are. Then anchor ourselves with a sense of control, like the Stoic philosophers did, like neuroscience tells us we should. Anchor ourselves but with a sense of control by accepting that we've got options, even if they're not perfect. So we move from this kind of just the unemotional foundation of facts to a very human sense of what can we do about it. And then to your point, when it comes to the third part, the hope part of the resilience cycle that I run all the time, is to move from survival and extend timelines towards a better future fueled by hope. So I'm running this all the time: facts, anchoring, and hope. And it's just a model that I have become used to running all the time. And it meant that I was ready. And we had to do that with my speaking business, with my global running event, with the science and technology research that we're doing. We just had to start with the facts, see what we could control, and move from that short-term survival mode to something beyond the crisis.
So I want to come back to the science technology in a bit, but let me just, before I do, just ask a question about all that. I think kind of one of the aspects of life that's come to the forefront over this is our mental health, looking after our own personal well-being. And very much at times we've all been pushing ourselves, we're mentally exhausted, pushing ourselves to the limits. Kind of, is there any advice or anything you can give to share about how you take those mental breaks so you can recharge yourself?
It's I'm laughing here because number one, I'm not good at it. And number two, I'm telling everyone that the neuroscience says that we must be good at taking breaks, because what we're talking about
do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly. Although I'm saying it, and as I said, I'm doing more and more of it. And look, particularly over the last 12 months, but I actually think this has been the case whether we're doing lots of traveling or whether we're working at home, the kind of boundaries and making sure that we put the structures in place on a daily basis, weekly, monthly basis, where we are conscious of the cognitive load that we're putting on ourselves. So I'm particularly interested in how we move from being spectators to being competitors. And more particularly, what do competitors do over the long term? And when you start to look into that kind of peak performance literature, emerging out of my own experiences of racing to the South Pole and being a competitive athlete in the past, I've been drawn towards non-ordinary states of consciousness. Right now, these non-ordinary states of consciousness are, the research is into psychedelics at one side, meditation and mindfulness at the other side, which again, I'm not good at. But the one that I'm particularly interested in is the flow state, this optimal state of consciousness where we perform our best and we feel our best. But we've all felt it. It's just when things are effortless, we lose our sense of self, time stands still or speeds up, we make connections and come up with answers we didn't know we had. Now that's actually part of a cycle. Most competitors think, well, a lot of competitive people think that they can perform at their best all of the time. And if they work harder, they'll get more done. Now, actually what happens is people who do that all of the time end up in the struggle phase of a 4-part cycle. And in the struggle phase, you perform 5 times worse than in a flow state. There's struggle and there's flow. In between that, coming back to answer your question, there's release and there's recovery. And what I am now, based on the neuroscience, what I'm now trying to do as a competitor, someone who advocates for that, operating in that domain, is I'm treating release, where nitric oxide floods the system, pushes out the stress hormones and makes room for the peak performance state of flow. We need to do that regularly throughout the day on a daily basis, getting away from the computer, putting boundaries around our work. We need to take it seriously. And then the recovery side, active recovery, time off, sleep, good nutrition, all of that stuff that companies have been providing to their employees on top of the work that they're doing. But in fact, what we have to do is make sure that release and recovery are seen and believed to be the high performance activities that the neuroscience suggests they are. So I'm trying to live that myself. And
almost as part of the work rather than on top of the work.
Correct, because if we get it right, we perform 5 times better than if we just struggle along throughout the days and weeks. We perform 5 times better. So arguably, and you can't do this, but arguably, if you were truly in flow all day on Monday, you wouldn't have to come in for the rest of the week because you'd have your week's work done. Now, we can't do it like that, but that's what we're talking about. And most people don't get into flow because they're working too hard. You have to step back and then step into it.
When you dropped into the office a couple of years ago, prior to the pandemic, you shared that your mission in life was to cure paralysis during your lifetime. Give us an update as to how things are going.
Well, things are, as I always say, frustratingly slow, but getting better. I've got a set of robotic legs. Lots of people around the world have access to that technology to allow people to stand and walk and move. We helped raise $15 million to commercialize a breakthrough piece of technology, which is electrical stimulation of the spinal cord to allow people to voluntarily move their legs or feed themselves or take the top off a water bottle if they're paralyzed from the neck down. That has now led on to a company with probably by the end of 2022, we'll start to see that technology being made available in the clinic. There are lots of other technologies, brain-machine interfaces, optogenetics, nerve bridging, and so on. But strangely, raising money and giving it to scientists is what you might expect to cure something like paralysis. But in fact, I spent some time with a guy called Chris Voss, who is the former chief hostage negotiator for the FBI. And I was just interested in it. His book is brilliant, Never Split the Difference. But I spent some time with him after doing his course, and he's since joined our advisory board because, in fact, what we identified was that whenever you get groups of human beings, a Wall Street investor, a scientist who's been working on a breakthrough for 50 years, they speak completely different languages, yet they've got to work together. So we identified patterns of fragmentation, destructive competition, erosion of trust that are not going to improve our chances of curing paralysis. In fact, they're going to hold it up. So we think that our best contribution is by creating a knowledge network of leadership experts, professional negotiators, behavioral scientists, peak performance psychologists, to help these different groups of people right across the, I'm loath to use the word ecosystem, but right across the horizontally across the system, so that we can create the conditions for collaboration to get stuff done quicker. And that stuff happens to be curing paralysis in our lifetime.
And how's that going? How's building the network going?
It's going particularly well. And we're sort of, at the moment, we've got a charity called Collaborative Cures that we set up last year, but that's actually building on the work that we've been doing for 10 years. And really what we're talking about is human connection. And we see it, I'm looking through the lens of science, technology, investments, charities, foundations, philanthropists, regulators, all these different people in an international, global context to try and bring them together. But we see it within teams. We see it within my own household. I might say, this is how we create the conditions for collaboration, for connection, for the release of oxytocin in the system, which helps to build trust. That's the important, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to human beings connecting with each other to get things done, to achieve more. So I find it particularly interesting. And I also find that human beings want to collaborate. So when we go to talk to scientists or investors or business people or leadership experts, and we say, look, here's the problem. We'd love your advice. We'd love your help. We'd love you to join this effort to help people collaborate better. Human beings are fundamentally good, and they want to do good things. They want to do interesting things. So we're finding no problem in talking to people and getting them involved in the network. The trick, and I don't think that it actually is a trick, the trick will be to get them all to contribute in a meaningful way, so that these projects of getting a robotics company in San Francisco to work with a spinal stimulation company in Switzerland over the long term to collaborate in a meaningful way and avoid the pitfalls of fragmentation. How we do that consistently and scale it up across the system, that's the big challenge, but the answers are surely there.
Well, we're doing some research before I spoke to you, we came up with this quote from Viktor Frankl, who said, when we cannot change our situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Any words of wisdom you've got for us as we enter, the next phase, whatever it was in this this post-pandemic world?
I'm a big fan of Viktor Frankl. Admiral Stockdale, a modern day Stoic, and I go right back to the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and so on. And what I've discovered is the reason that I'm attracted to these stories of people who make it through extreme situations is because I'm kind of living that myself. I'm living it, I'm researching it, I'm testing it, and looping around, and these challenges keep appearing. So the sort of guiding light that I live by and that I speak about is that sometimes we have the luxury of choosing our challenges, and sometimes challenges choose us. What we decide to do about it, that's what counts, and that's what we can control.
Mark Pollock, on that note, thank you so much for your time today. As always, been fantastic speaking to you. I look forward to catching up soon.
Great. Thanks very much.